Welcome to the deep dive where we try to cut through the noise and get straight to the knowledge.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into, well, a pretty fascinating and high-stakes encounter. It unfolded right in the Oval Office between former U.S. President Donald Trump and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, this was a meeting that it didn't just make headlines, did it? It really starkly highlighted how deeply complex South African domestic issues can suddenly find themselves on the international stage. And, how those issues can be perceived very differently depending on who you ask.
Absolutely. Our source material for this deep dive, it's drawn from excerpts of a BBC article. The title was Trump Confronts South Africa's President Over Afrikaner Issues.
Right.
So our mission today is really to unpack exactly what happened during this meeting, try to understand the different perspectives and narratives presented in that source material,
Yeah.
and explore the complex layers of issues this encounter brought bubbling to the surface, within South Africa itself.
And you should think of this as more than just like a diplomatic summary. It's really a case study, isn't it? It shows how specific interest groups can influence foreign policy discussions, how national governments navigate these external pressures while, simultaneously grappling with really intricate internal challenges, and just how multifaceted problems like crime and inequality truly are.
And, for anyone keen on being truly well-informed about contemporary global and national affairs, maybe you're just keeping up with current events, or maybe you're even preparing for something like the UPSC exams where understanding these dynamics is absolutely key.
Crucial, yeah.
This deep dive really offers valuable insights into how these complex layers interact and influence real-world events. Okay, let's unpack what happened in that room.
So, okay, picture the scene. President Ramaphosa visiting the Oval Office. The BBC article describes former President Trump's approach to Ramaphosa as, well, quite aggressive, even confrontational. Yeah, it uses pretty strong language, like calling him a political Rottweiler. It termed the encounter an ambush and even a choreographed onslaught.
Choreographed onslaught. Wow, that paints a really vivid picture, doesn't it? A direct, maybe even planned challenge.
It does.
But the article notes Ramaphosa's reaction was strikingly different, almost a deliberate counterpoint, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. He reportedly remained calm, demonstrated measured handling throughout the whole thing, and apparently even smiled when Trump was frowning, which is quite an image.
That contrast in demeanor is really highlighted in the source as significant, isn't it?
Definitely. It's just a conscious strategy, perhaps, from Ramaphosa's side to, maintain composure and maybe diffuse the tension under that kind of, pointed pressure.
So what exactly was Trump confronting Ramaphosa about? What was the substance?
Well, the article traces this back to specific claims. Trump was making these allegations of persecution against Afrikaners and a supposed farm murder crisis happening in South Africa.
Right. The farm murder issue has definitely been a talking point in certain circles.
And this wasn't coming from nowhere, apparently.
Right.
The source makes it pretty clear there had been a significant lobbying effort behind this.
Ah, okay.
It points to specific right-wing Afrikaner groups that's South Africans primarily descended from Dutch settlers, and it particularly names the Solidarity Movement. They'd apparently been actively lobbying the Trump administration.
So they were actively pushing this narrative in the U.S.
That's right. They'd reportedly toured the U.S. with the explicit goal of engaging the administration. And they were quite vocal, apparently, welcoming Trump for putting the problems on the international stage.
Interesting. So direct lobbying efforts having a real impact.
It seems so. And there were specific voices quoted. The article mentions Ernst Roditz, described as a leading personality on the Afrikaner right, actually thanking Trump for showing videos and headlines related to these issues. And Jocko Kleinhans from Solidarity went even further, suggesting Trump deserved a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing the farm murder crisis onto the international agenda.
A Nobel Prize. Wow. That really shows the intensity of their perspective, doesn't it? And how much importance they placed on getting this issue raised internationally.
It certainly does. And it's interesting, the article mentions seeing an adaptation of Trump's own slogan, Make America Great Again, actually repurposed as Make South Africa Great Again outside the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria.
That political messaging clearly resonates across borders then. It shows how these things can travel.
It really highlights how these sort of transnational political links and symbols can form. The source also notes a tangible outcome of these claims. Trump reportedly offered refugee status specifically to Afrikaners.
Really? Refugee status?
Yes, and nearly 60 were said to have already been resettled in the U.S. based on that.
Okay, so that's the background on the Afrikaner issue claims. Now, shifting gears slightly, the article says a particularly contentious point Trump raised was this controversial song, Shoot the Boer.
Ah, yes, that song. It's got a very charged history.
Right. Trump reportedly amplified the role of the EFF party. That's the Economic Freedom Fighters, Julius Malema's party.
The left-wing populists.
By showing a video of Malema singing it at a rally and demanding action be taken against him?
Yes, and the article explains, the EFF party advocates for the nationalization of land, and Malema is known to chant this song at rallies. The song itself, as you said, complicated history. It was once an anti-apartheid anthem.
And these Afrikaner lobby groups, they've gone to court trying to get it banned, haven't they? Arguing it's a literal call for violence against them.
They have. But the BBC article presents the perspective from South Africa's own Supreme Court of Appeal, which actually ruled on this specific issue.
Okay, what did the court say?
Well, the court's view, essentially, was that a reasonably well-informed person, understanding the context, political protests, songs, rallies, would understand the words are not meant literally as a call to murder. And any associated gesture isn't a literal call to arms either.
So symbolic rather than literal.
Exactly. Instead, the court interpreted the song as a provocative way, their words for the EFF, to advance its political agenda, which is specifically aimed at ending what they see as land and economic injustice.
Right. Provocative but political speech within bounds, according to the court.
That seems to be the gist of the ruling, yeah.
And how did Ramaphosa respond to Trump on this specific point about the song and Malema?
Well, the article quotes him basically saying, look, South Africa is a democracy. And while his government is completely against what Malema does,
Okay.
the EFF, as a political party, has a constitutional right to exist and participate politically.
That raises that classic tension, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Balancing freedom of expression with language that others perceive as deeply harmful or, inciting.
It's a tough line to walk in many democracies.
Yeah. So seeing Trump bring that up directly and hearing Ramaphosa's response straight from the source is quite telling about those different perspectives.
Definitely. Now, turning to how South Africans themselves reacted to this whole encounter and the narrative Trump was presenting, the source highlights quite different viewpoints.
Okay.
Many South Africans, including those who were actually part of Ramaphosa's delegation, reportedly praised his calm and measured handling of the situation.
And what was interesting about the delegation itself, as the article describes it, was its diversity, right? It seemed like a deliberate move.
Absolutely. Bringing in prominent figures from different racial backgrounds and political affiliations seemed like a conscious effort to showcase that rainbow nation idea and present a sort of united front against the claims being made.
Who was mentioned specifically?
Well, the article mentions figures like John Steenhuisen, he's white, the leader of the Democratic Alliance Party, and actually the agriculture minister in the new government.
Right.
And also Zingizwalosi, who is the president of a major trade union, COSASO. So quite a mix.
But not everyone was happy, I gather, particularly with the lobbying efforts.
No, definitely not. Critics within South Africa, according to the source, directed their anger squarely at those lobbying groups. They saw their actions as a lack of patriotism.
Okay.
Especially considering that the country is currently governed by this government of national unity, essentially a coalition of, I think, 10 parties across the racial and ideological spectrum.
Wow, 10 parties.
Yeah, specifically formed to try and tackle the nation's problems together. So going outside that framework was seen negatively by some.
And what about the government's perspective on the actual issues raised, like safety and farming?
Well, it's presented as more nuanced, particularly through Steenhuisen, the DA leader and ag minister. He acknowledged, yes, there's a real safety problem in the country.
Okay, so acknowledging the core issue of crime.
Yes, and saying it requires more policing resources. But, importantly, he also pushed back strongly on the narrative of a mass exodus of white farmers. He stated that the majority really do want to stay.
So countering that specific narrative of white farmers fleeing en masse?
Exactly. And another voice, the land reform minister, Ms. Wanel Nihanso, is quoted describing the Oval Office meeting as actually uncomfortable to watch.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah. And he was very direct in countering the core claim Trump seemed to be making. He stated emphatically, there is no genocide in South Africa.
Right, a very strong rebuttal.
Very strong. He acknowledged crime exists, sure, but said it's like in other countries and this crime affects many people, importantly, many people, not just one group. And he also applauded Ramaphosa's composure during the whole thing.
Okay, so that brings us to a really key counter-narrative that seems to run through the article, doesn't it? This perspective from many within South Africa that the country's crime problem isn't primarily racial.
That's a crucial point the source emphasizes. It includes voices specifically supporting this view. For instance, Johan Rupert, who's a prominent Afrikaner billionaire.
Okay.
He's mentioned highlighting that the highest murder rate isn't actually in rural farming areas, but in the Cape Town townships. These are areas mostly populated by black or colored residents
Right.
who are the victims of, violent gangs.
So shifting the focus from farms to urban areas and different demographics affected.
Precisely. And Zingiswalosi, the trade union president we mentioned earlier, she also spoke powerfully about the devastating situation in rural areas where the black majority are, detailing horrific crimes like rape and murder affecting women and the elderly there.
So broadening the picture of victimhoods significantly.
Absolutely. And her proposed solutions, as quoted in the article, they focus on addressing these problems through things like trade and creating employment, getting at the socioeconomic roots,
Right.
rather than framing it purely in racial terms.
And the article actually culminates this point, doesn't it, with Losi's key statement.
Yes, it quotes her saying, the problem in South Africa, it is not necessarily about race, but it is about crime.
And the article adds,
It adds that this is a sentiment with which most South Africans would agree, which is a powerful claim, directly challenging that external narrative of targeted racial persecution.
it really reframes the whole issue from the perspective presented within the country.
Completely.
This whole encounter also gives us quite a window into the current political dynamics playing out in South Africa, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
The article mentions the formation of this new government of national unity after the recent election. Its specific task is tackling major issues like the high crime rate we've been discussing, and also significant unemployment around 32%,
32%, wow.
which, again, the source notes disproportionately affects black people.
And it lays out the political strategy behind this coalition, especially from the DA's perspective.
Yes, Steenhuisen, the DA leader, is quoted stating explicitly that his party, which is center-right, pro-free market, joined the government primarily to keep the EFF out.
To keep Malema's economic freedom fighters out of power.
Exactly. To prevent them from getting into a position of governing power. He even made a direct call for international support for this current unity government,
Why? What was his reasoning?
arguing it would strengthen their ability to address the nation's problems, grow the economy, and, in his words, shut the door forever on Malema potentially getting into government. He referred to Malema as a rebel.
So you really see the political battle lines being drawn there.
Absolutely. The source sort of paints this picture. Ramaphosa's ANC and Steenhuisen's DA trying to hold the center ground, governing together. While you have the Afrikaner right wing, the EFF, and also former President Zuma's new Umkhonto Sizwe party positioned at the extremes of the political spectrum.
And the article notes Ramaphosa trying to bridge divides by invoking Mandela.
Yes, apparently he invoked Nelson Mandela during the meeting, championing unity and using Mandela as that powerful symbol of racial reconciliation that followed the end of white minority rule back in 1994.
A powerful symbol indeed.
And its relevant political context, as the article points out, that the EFF's actual election performance saw them fall to fourth place.
Ah, okay.
And Ramaphosa explicitly ruled out forming any coalition with them, which certainly limited their potential political influence heading into this new government formation.
Got it. The source also included a couple of other sort of quite humanizing perspectives from the delegation, didn't it? Adding more layers.
It did, which was interesting. It highlights Ramaphosa's strategic decision to bring famous Afrikaner golfers Ernie Els and Retief Goosen along to the meeting in the Oval Office.
Golfers. Why golfers?
Well, it seems like another attempt to show unity and counter the narrative. Ernie Els reportedly took out his South African passport right there.
No way.
Yeah, to demonstrate his patriotism. He apparently spoke of his deep respect for Nelson Mandela and the whole project of uniting the country, expressing a genuine desire for South Africa to flourish, with America's help.
That's quite a statement. And Retief Goosen.
His contribution is particularly interesting because it adds a bit more of that on-the-ground reality, acknowledging the difficulties farmers face. He reportedly spoke of the constant battle. His own brother faces farming,
Hmm.
with people trying to, quote, burn the farm down and to chase you away. So acknowledging the fear and danger.
Okay, so he didn't shy away from the difficulties.
No, but what's striking is how Goosen apparently ended his contribution. Despite detailing those fears and challenges, he concluded by saying that the guys who live on the farms, despite the fear, live a great life.
Huh. Live a great life. That has a real nuance, doesn't it? It goes beyond just simple narratives of crisis or persecution.
It really does. It complicates the picture in a very human way.
So, bringing this whole deep dive together then, what this specific encounter in the Oval Office seems to vividly illustrate is this real clash of competing narratives about South Africa.
Absolutely. On one side, you have this narrative of targeted racial persecution and a farm murder crisis, which was amplified by external lobbying groups and presented directly by the then U.S. president.
Right. And on the other side,
And on the other side, you have the perspective presented very strongly by the South African delegation and echoed by other voices within the country that while crime is undeniably a very real and serious problem, it's widespread. It affects people across all racial lines, and it's fundamentally driven by these deeper underlying socioeconomic challenges like poverty and massive unemployment.
it really throws into sharp relief how national realities can be interpreted and perhaps presented so differently on the international stage, often shaped by specific political motivations and agendas, it seems.
Absolutely. This case study is, well, it's a potent example of the challenges involved in communicating the complex realities of a nation globally. How easily complex domestic issues can be simplified or maybe reframed by external actors.
Okay.
And the constant navigation national governments have to do between addressing their internal problems and managing their international perception.
So this deep dive, drawing on the BBC's reporting, really gives you, the listener, a clear view of that dynamic, the stark difference between an external narrative, often driven by specific agendas, and the complex, often quite different internal perspective on huge issues like crime and inequality.
Yeah.
And it reinforces, I think, the critical importance of seeking out multiple sources, multiple perspective, to truly grasp complex international and domestic affairs, which is obviously valuable for understanding the world, but also, if you are preparing for things like competitive exams like the UPSC, this kind of analysis is key.
Indeed. And perhaps a final thought to leave you with. Considering all the different accounts, motivations, and perspectives we've just unpacked from this source material, what does this particular international confrontation reveal to you about the challenges of communicating national realities and tackling incredibly complex issues like crime and inequality on the global stage? It certainly leaves you with a lot to consider.
It definitely does. We really encourage you to continue exploring these important topics. If you found this deep dive valuable and gained some insight, please do consider liking and subscribing.
And feel free to leave a comment. If you have further questions or maybe topics you'd like us to explore in future deep dives, let us know.
Our source material for this deep dive was from the BBC.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in.